Hello all. Welcome to our webinar, MPA Enforcement, Practical Strategies for Marine Managers. This webinar is brought to you by the Nature Conservancy's Reef Resilience Network in partnership with the Blue Nature Alliance and in collaboration with the International Coral Reef Initiative as part of their 4 Coral webinar series. My name is Kristen Mays and I'm Strategy Lead for the Reef Resilience Network and your host for this webinar. In the face of increasing threats to our oceans, marine protected areas, or MPAs, continue to be one of the most essential tools available for marine conservation. MPAs can protect biodiversity and ecosystem services while providing community benefits such as food security, employment opportunities, and protection of traditional ways of life. However, simply establishing an MPA is insufficient to achieve these outcomes. It's well understood that there are certain conditions and actions that give an MPA the best chance of achieving these results. MPAs must have good governance, they must be well designed, well planned, be actively and equitably managed, and address threats to achieve their ecological, socioeconomic, and cultural objectives. In other words, they need to be effectively managed. Enforcement is a critical and often challenging aspect of effective management. So the purpose of today's webinar is to help us tackle this tough topic with guidance from experts and practitioners in the field, including, as you can see on the screen, Sunny Tellwright, Ocean Technology and Innovation Program Manager at Conservation International, and also MCS Advisor for the Blue Nature Alliance, Gregg Casad, Senior Compliance Advisor to WildAid, Natalie Miaoulis, Fisheries Specialist for the Nature Conservancy's Northern Caribbean Program. During this webinar, our speakers will provide an overview of monitoring, control, surveillance, and enforcement systems for MPAs, also known as MCS&E, which is an acronym you're probably going to hear quite a bit during this webinar. And they're also going to share insights on practical MCS&E strategies and then discuss the application of these strategies in the Bahamas. The webinar will last for an hour and the presentations will be followed by an open question and answer or discussion session. And I'll also note that a recording of the webinar is going to be emailed to everyone after the webinar concludes. Before we start, let's do a few quick review of the Zoom functions. So there is a toolbar at the bottom. Hopefully you're all familiar with this, but it's always good to recap. At the bottom of your screen, on the left of the toolbar, you should see audio settings button. You can click the up arrow and select for different audio output options, such as speakers, headphones, or other Bluetooth devices. If you're experiencing technical difficulties, please use the chat feature and send a private message to our Zoom support, Paula Felix. You can find Paula's name there and she can assist you. If you have any questions that come up throughout the webinar, please go ahead and use that Q&A feature that you see there. You could submit questions at any time, which we'll save and ask our presenters during the Q&A session. You can choose to submit questions anonymously if that's something you're interested in. And then during the session itself, you can use the raise hand feature that you see there, and we'll unmute you and you can ask your question yourself. Here is our agenda for the webinar. Pretty simple. We're doing welcome and introductions. We'll do an overview of MPA monitoring, control, surveillance, and enforcement, and then dive into the Bahamas case study. We'll save a good chunk of our time for the discussion and Q&A, and then do a brief wrap. Before we get into the topic of enforcement, just a really quick intro to the network, who we are and what resources may be of interest to you and your colleagues. So we've been around for almost 2 decades now. The Nature Conservancy's Reef Resilience Network has helped marine managers and practitioners around the world effectively manage, protect, and restore critical marine habitats. With the help of more than 400 global experts, we synthesize and share the latest science and management strategies to keep managers informed and inspired. We connect managers globally with peers and experts to share resources and solutions to improve management. And we provide training and mentorship to launch monitoring, outreach, and marine conservation projects. We have about 5,000 active members participating in the network currently, but have trained almost 50,000 people over the last 20 years from more than 85% of reef locations. To serve our global audience, our network hub, reefresilience.org, houses most of our resources, which I'll show you next, but nearly 1 million people visit the hub annually. So based on the needs of our network members and of course their input, the hub features, this is just an image of what the hub looks like if you go to reefresilience.org, but it features 9 online courses on resilience-based management, wastewater pollution, sustainable livelihoods, which is a new course, and more. If you could go to the next, please, Paula. The online courses are offered self-paced. You can take them at any time. And then we do offer them periodically with mentorship. The toolkits, the science and strategy toolkits, feature the latest science and management strategies across 18 topics critical to effective management. We provide a regularly updated set of case studies from around the world that demonstrate successfully applied management strategies, lessons learned, of course. We regularly survey new publications and create summaries of relevant journal articles for our open access library. You can see there article summaries. We host, obviously, interactive webinars to help managers learn about new topics and connect with peers and experts. And then we provide mentoring and networking opportunities. So that's just brief intro about the network. Enough about us, let's hear about you. Just want to get a sense of who's joining us today and your level of familiarity with MPA enforcement. So if you could share with us if you are currently conducting any enforcement activities in your MPA, that would be wonderful. We'll give you a second to go ahead and log your response. Okay, that may be enough time if we could go ahead and see the results. Okay, so of the available options, 34% said we are undertaking some activities but would like to do more. But the biggest bulk was none of these questions applied. So I'm really curious about that. We have a poll, not a poll, sorry, a really brief survey at the end of the webinar where we get feedback on the webinar and get an opportunity to hear from you. So for those of you that had a different response, we'd love for you to fill in and tell us a little bit more about why you're joining today's webinar during that survey. So thank you, that gives us a good little bit of good sense of who's joining. Okay, I'd now like to welcome Sunny, Ocean Technology and Innovation Program Manager at Conservation International and MCS Advisor for the Blue Nature Alliance. I just want to mention the Reef Resilience Network is partnering with the Blue Nature Alliance to achieve our shared mission of improving effective management of MPAs. And we're doing this by developing a suite of resources and learning opportunities for MPA managers and practitioners. So we just released a podcast episode with Sunny discussing MPA enforcement on our new podcast, Reef Exchanges. So please go ahead and take a listen if you haven't yet. We're also developing a case study on MPA enforcement in the Bahamas. So after today's, that'll be released shortly and you'll get some further details that will expand, add some color to today's webinar. And we're also developing an online toolkit on MPA enforcement, which we are hoping to release and planning to release, I should say, in early 2025. So welcome, Sunny. We're excited to hear a little bit about Blue Nature Alliance and be introduced to MCS&E. Thanks for joining.
Great, thanks, Kristen. So yeah, over the next few slides, I'll be introducing the Blue Nature Alliance, who we are, what we do, where we work, and then introducing the concept of monitoring, control, surveillance, and enforcement, MCS&E. And so the Blue Nature Alliance is a global initiative to advance conservation of 18 million kilometers squared of ocean by 2027, which is a huge amount of the ocean, right? It's equivalent to 5%. And ultimately, this is towards contributing to the global 30 by 30 target, the 30% of the ocean protected by 2030. Next slide, please. So the Alliance has project activities underway in over 170 ocean conservation areas. And you can see this in the map. That's some of the areas that we work in. And this work includes, one, advancing the protection of new areas, new sites. Two, improving management of existing sites. And then three, upgrading protection of existing sites. Next slide, please. And so reaching this ambitious goal not only requires countries to accelerate efforts to protect marine ecosystems, but it also requires a substantial increase in the human, technical, and institutional capacities. And so because of this, the Alliance also focuses on the enabling conditions that are necessary to reach these targets. So this includes conducting research, developing tools, innovations, supporting conservation finance, and conducting knowledge sharing and capacity development, like this toolkit that we're co-developing with the Reef Resilience Network, and like the podcast that we just recorded, as Christian mentioned, and this webinar. And because of the breadth of this work, the Alliance partners with over 100 organizations, including with governments, NGOs, and local communities. And around 75% of the Alliance's resources goes directly to supporting implementing partners working on the ground. Next slide, please. And so at each engagement, we work closely with partners to develop a strategy that responds to their specific challenges and needs. And this includes co-developing an effective monitoring, control, surveillance, and enforcement system to essentially set these sites up for success. And effective MCS&E is a crucial component to having effective marine conservation areas, or MPAs, that are truly protected. Because MCS&E is really about the implementation of a plan. So if you have a plan for a new conservation area, MCS&E is about the operations needed to implement that plan. And it includes the four components. So firstly, monitoring. What do I mean when we say, MCS&E and the monitoring component? This is about the data needed for fisheries managers to make decisions about catch, areas of operation, or zoning. Control is about the regulations in place. And so for marine protected areas, this includes boundary controls, entry-exit conditions, or reporting requirements like vessel monitoring systems, whether they're required to report. Surveillance, this is about the observation process and what technology is used to observe and how frequently. And this can include traditional traditional surveillance like at-sea patrols, or more advanced surveillance like from satellites, like satellite radar. And then finally, enforcement. This is the process of making people obey the law. It's the penalty and deterrent aspect. And it includes the detection of non-compliance and the resolution process that may include prosecution sometimes. And so even though MCS&E is a fisheries-related concept, and it might seem a little abstract, we actually have it in our day-to-day lives all the time. And the analogy that I like to use is related to driving. So when we're on the roads, there are cameras monitoring traffic and congestion. And that data is used to inform where new roads are built. So there's a clear monitoring aspect to it. When we're driving, there are speed limits in place, right? We're driving and there are signs telling us, no, you can't go over 30 miles per hour. That is a form of control, and there are regulations on how fast we can drive. And then there may also be speed cameras. That is a form of surveillance. It's observing if we're going too fast. And then if, unfortunately, we are going too fast, we may get a fine through the post. And that is a mechanism of enforcement. We get a penalty for breaking the regulations. And without this system in place, driving would be carnage, right? I wouldn't want to be out on the roads. And the same is true for the oceans, right? We need an effective MCS&E system to ensure that the places that we're designated as protected are actually truly protected. And so the Alliance partners with WildAid Marine to develop these types of plans and systems for effective protection. And so you'll hear from them next. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Sunny, for that helpful overview. Really love that analogy too. That's gonna stick with me. Okay, so now we'll hand it over to Gregg and Natalie to talk a little bit more about what that looks like in practice, and then show us what that looks like in the Bahamas. So welcome, Gregg. Excited that you're here. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Kristen. Good morning. My name is Gregg Casad, and I am a Senior Compliance Advisor with WildAid. It's a pleasure to be here today to share some insights on marine protected area enforcement and offer a few practical strategies for managers. Next slide, please. A bit about WildAid. We are a nonprofit organization based in San Francisco, California, working with coastal states and protected area managers to develop effective enforcement and compliance systems within priority marine areas. Next slide. When I say priority marine areas, I mean not only marine protected areas, but also other effective area-based conservation measures, OECMs, and fisheries regulations within a country's exclusive economic zone. Our focus at WildAid is on improving enforcement and compliance and collaborating with our partners to achieve their marine conservation goals. Ultimately, we aim to empower our partners to independently manage their marine resources with an effective enforcement system in the long term. Next slide. What makes WildAid uniquely suited to this work is our team's extensive experience. Collectively, we bring over 150 years of management, operational, and tactical law enforcement expertise, which we apply to help our partners strengthen their enforcement capabilities. Next slide. Currently, we work in 16 countries, supporting enforcement in 95 marine areas. This represents a tenfold increase in the past 5 years. We are growing and seeking to offer our insights as the international community drives towards achieving the 30 by 30 goals. Next slide. Our approach is a structured six-step process called the Blueprint for Marine Protection. Like architects, we design a comprehensive enforcement system tailored to each location. Then we guide the local builders, the rangers, fisheries officers, leaders, community members through the system's construction, making their vision a reality. Next slide. At the core of our model is the marine protection system, which includes 5 key components essential for effective enforcement in any MPA or coastal fishery. For example, we help our partners review legal and regulatory frameworks to close loopholes and promote the necessary tools for effective enforcement. For example, inspection authority. In addition, we advise on and support the implementation of surveillance tools like cameras and radars. We advise on boats and other resources to detect and catch violators, and we work with the legal systems, prosecutors, judges, to ensure meaningful consequences for poaching and other illegal activities. Beyond equipment and legal frameworks, we also integrate local stakeholders, fishers, tourism operators, community members into the protection process, helping rangers, fisheries officers educate their communities on the value of marine conservation. Our team provides training, mentorship, professional development to local staff, reinforcing and strengthening their roles and ability to use enforcement tools safely and effectively. Additionally, we help develop long-term budgets that streamline costs and create new revenue streams to fund these protection systems sustainably. If you'd like to learn more about WildAid's approach, I encourage you to visit our website, wildaid.org, where you can find additional details on our methods, examples of marine protection system plans we've developed worldwide. Next slide. So enough of the pitch about WildAid. Today, I'm here to share some best practices that we've observed, which may be practical steps that you as an MPA or fisheries manager could take. My hope is these strategies can be incorporated into your efforts to strengthen your enforcement and compliance programs. First, and this one's going to seem a little bit obvious, but engage all stakeholders early. When developing a management plan, ensure all voices are included from the beginning. I encourage you to include law enforcement agencies as critical stakeholders in the management process. Identify who has the authority and jurisdiction to act on compliance issues, as these responsibilities often are shared across agencies. For example, the Coast Guard, Navy, police, customs, perhaps your port authority. If they have responsibility, the agency's input and participation should be sought. Number two, clarify roles and responsibility. It's critically important to determine and identify which agency will lead enforcement and establish clear points of contact. Agencies like your Coast Guard, Navy, and police often have authority in your MPA, but marine conservation may not be their top priority. As a manager and partner law enforcement agency, because a lot of your organizations have law enforcement authority within your bounds, I encourage engaging these multi-authority partner agencies and ensuring they understand how their efforts, how the Navy, Coast Guard, police's efforts can contribute to achieving these broader conservation goals within your country and for your coastal communities. Number three, identifying your enforcement needs. You need to assess the specific threats to your conservation goals and determine where enforcement approaches are required. They're not required in all situations. When we think about some of the approaches, these can range from community engagement and outreach and education, all the way to holding individuals accountable for violations. A dedicated team or individuals responsible for liaison with enforcement partners ensures that violations are addressed quickly, effectively, and consistently, and that they don't slip through the cracks due to miscommunication or lack of coordination. In our experience, coastal communities and fishing industry representatives seek resolution and transparency of management and enforcement efforts. Effective partnerships and clear ownership of responses is one way to meet their needs. Strong agency coordination is essential to enforce laws and hold violators accountable effectively. While we aim to educate people about compliance, we also must be prepared for those who intentionally disregard the rules. A well-coordinated legal and enforcement framework enables us to address these cases effectively. At WildAid, we provide technical assistance to help our partners build these essential connections and establish enforcement plans to tackle illegal activities. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to share this perspective on best practices for MPA enforcement. I hope these recommendations support your efforts in addressing illegal activities and improving compliance within your area. Next slide. Finally, I'd like to thank the Reef Resilience Network, the Nature Conservancy, Blue Nature Alliance, and the International Coral Reef Initiative for hosting this event and allowing WildAid to share our perspective. Now, it's my pleasure to hand it over to Natalie Miaoulis, my colleague from the Nature Conservancy, who will discuss this approach in practice within the Bahamas. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Natalie Miaoulis. I'm a fisheries specialist for the Nature Conservancy's Northern Caribbean program and located in the Bahamas. The Nature Conservancy works in over 79 countries around the world. We are a science-based organization. We are one of the largest nonprofit organizations as well. And everywhere we work, we are always looking at what are the needs of the country. And here in the Bahamas, next slide, please. Here in the Bahamas, we have one of the largest EEZs in the entire Caribbean. And with that brings about many challenges to enforcement and management of our natural resources. Next slide, please. Within the country, we have 4 main priority areas of work: marine management, sustainable fisheries, coral restoration, and climate change adaptation. Although these are each a separate priority, they are all interlinked and all depend on each other. We cannot talk about marine management and MPAs without talking about sustainable fisheries or coral reefs. And so we know that by improving one of these pillars that we are affecting and impacting all of the pillars. Next slide, please. Here in the Bahamas, we've been working for over 20 years in policy building, capacity support. And one of the areas through our marine protection has been supporting over 16 million acres of new protected areas in the country. Next slide. For our sustainable fisheries portfolio of work, we've also supported the country with developing management plans, advising on fisheries regulations, and also helping to support the country's certification and being the recipient of the Marine Stewardship Council's certification of sustainability for its spiny lobster fishery. Next slide, please. But through our 20 years of work in the country, through new declarations of MPAs, through new management plans for fisheries, we realize that all of this is truly in vain if we do not have adequate enforcement and compliance within the Bahamas. Also during this time, we also heard directly from communities that reached out to us and said, we need better enforcement. We need improved compliance. Our oceans are suffering because of this. We're facing problems with illegal fishing by Bahamians, but we're also facing problems with illegal fishing from foreigners coming into our country and fishing. While communities were asking us for help, then we also had government agencies coming and saying, please help us. We do not have the capacity to enforce all of our EEZ. We have over 700 islands and keys. We just do not have the resources. How can you assist us? Well, being an international nonprofit organization, we had to say, well, what is the Nature Conservancy's role in this? How can we assist? And we realized that it's not us as the answer, but we knew that it was going to take every agency, as Gregg mentioned, that is responsible for marine enforcement, stakeholders, fishers, exporters, everyone involved, even local community managers, local community members, to come together for us to realize the vision of improved enforcement in the Bahamas. And so to do that, we launched, next slide, please, the Marine Action Partnership, also known as MAP, to really bring together all of our agencies to work towards improved marine enforcement. We also knew that by bringing all of our agencies, all of our stakeholders together, that we could also pull support from outside of the country to help fill some of our gaps, such as the great support that WildAid has provided the country with that technical expertise, and also reaching across borders to the U.S. Coast Guard, Florida Fish and Wildlife for support. And so we set off on a 5-year journey to improve marine enforcement in the country through this collaborative process. Next slide, please. And we knew that we wanted to have improved enforcement, but we also knew that we needed to understand where was our current level of enforcement in the country, not just for MPAs, but overall, what resources did we have, or what did we not have? And then we needed to understand, well, where could we pull support internally within the country and outside of the country? Next slide, please. We also wanted to drive accountability for all of our partners. So one of the objectives is we knew we needed to create an action plan that had responsibilities for every agency built in as well. And we knew that we needed to build a mechanism to also monitor this action plan to see, are we really reaching the goals that we set out to achieve? Next slide, please. For the Bahamas Department of Marine Resources serves as one of the lead agencies for the implementation of the Marine Action Partnership. WildAid has served as a great partner and technical expertise and implementing partner, and we have also served as facilitator for the project. Next slide, please. I now want to play a video for you that really shows the overview of why we started the Marine Action Partnership and let you hear directly from fishermen and also our enforcement agencies on some of the challenges that they've had and also some of the successes that they've had because of the Marine Action Partnership, and specifically one of the cases that is discussed in this video. Thank you.
When I see them, I don't feel good. because I know they don't like the Bahamian fishermen. They don't like the Bahamian fishermen. They know we're their enemy. And as soon as we see them, we report them. Our conch industry almost went out because of these poachers. I have two sons. I didn't encourage them to come on the boat because what was happening out there, there was no future for them.
Topping the news, poaching continues to be a serious problem for local fishermen, and while the Defense Force has stepped up patrols to decrease those numbers, poachers seem to be getting a bit crafty in the way they do their illegal business.
The biggest issue that we have is illegal fishing. The Bahamas has over 700 islands and keys that stretches as far north as Florida and as far south as Cuba and Haiti and Dominican Republic. Boss man. For this type of work, we have so much ground to cover, north to south. Law enforcement is becoming our biggest challenge. We want to make sure that there's no illegal fish on board. We also have a lot of protected fish that are in our waters. We want to make sure that they are forbidden, no matter what. They're not to have any kind of contraband at all on their vessel when it comes to those kind of fish.
I'm the Micah man. We've had the opportunity to arrest the Roni. She had about 60 persons on board and she had about 60,000 pounds of fish on board when we arrested her. I've been on the front line for a long time now, and with the Marine Action Partnership, we're able to combine efforts, and we have sustained patrols in targeted areas year-round. There is an important case of Florida fisherman was arrested and charged in Florida for having fisheries products caught in the Bahamas. And as a result of that, we were able to walk away with a vessel. That was a landmark case. And this is all a result of the Marine Action Partnership.
The agencies involved in the Marine Action Partnership work together through action plans to improve marine law enforcement across the Bahamas.
I just wanted to find out if I can measure some of your tongue clips, if you don't mind. I'll be quick. All right.
My hope is that Bahamians and the world at large take marine laws more serious. Because we have had so many loopholes over the years, persons have taken advantage of those opportunities, and now is the time for everyone to realize that that can no longer happen here. That's not something that you can go to the Bahamas and do.
This year, no fishermen reported no poachers to the Defense Force. We didn't see any. The success we had this season was because of the Defense Force. Everybody working at the same goal, to protect what is ours for the future generation.
Our oceans are a part of who we are as a people.
We don't produce nothing in the Bahamas, but we export lobster, stone crab, sponge.
We have to preserve this. It sustains our economy. It's a staple diet of Bahamians.
Our wildlife, our fisheries, we want to make sure that we carry on for the next generation.
Once you take care of the ocean take care of you. I mean, our future's bright.
Thank you. I wanted you to have an opportunity to hear firsthand from some of our partners on their experience of participating in the MAP and also some of the challenges. I want to stress that marine enforcement improvement goes beyond one specific area. It's really looking at holistically marine enforcement improvement for an entire country, right? Because if you can improve your enforcement at a national level, if you can improve coordination within your partners at that level, then you're building the resources that you need for priority areas across your EEZ. So I want to start with our enforcement assessment. We really set out to understand what were the gaps, what were the opportunities, where could we as agencies share resources to improve our efficiency and effectiveness, but then also where were those gaps? Because we knew this was a critical step in order to build an action plan. You need to have a really secure understanding about where your strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities. And this assessment was conducted by WildAid and with the assistance and facilitation of the Nature Conservancy across 8 islands of the Bahamas. We met with locals on the ground, we met with policymakers, high levels, those everyday men on the ground and women that are trying to enforce the law. And next slide, please. And then we were able to use this information to develop a 5-year action plan. And within this 5-year action plan, it was very specific in terms of each action that would be taken to reach each specific objective. And across that, we looked at the 5 priority areas of surveillance and enforcement, policies and consequences, consistent funding, training and mentorship, and community engagement. And with each activity was an agency's name next to it, who was responsible to see that activity through. And this helped drive accountability, but also help us understand what was the support needed for each agency, funding-wise, capacity-wise, or from ourselves as partners to help that activity become a reality. Next slide, please. So along the way, some of the key outputs of this action plan is, first and foremost, we have a memorandum of understanding across all of our agencies, including the Ministry of Defense and National Security for the country, which is a very powerful document that gives authority for each of these agencies to implement this action plan. It shows the support of the government for the implementation of this project. Secondly, was the formation of a MAP steering committee, which has a representative from each of these agencies involved. And we have annual meetings to check in, monitor the progress of the action plan. Maybe why aren't some activities moving forward? What support is needed? Are priorities shifting, etc. So the plan is a living document. It's alive, and it also changes and is modified based on the needs of the country at the time or of the agencies as well. As you saw in the video, we've had great success with a few really important cases where we were able to use the action plan, this partnership and the connections made to help bring cases actually to court, and also educate and use these cases as education to drive compliance to deter future cases as well. So these have been great wins. As well as working with the Florida Fish and Wildlife, NOAA, for training to our enforcement agencies in the Bahamas. So they've actually come to our country and trained. We've also sent agencies to Florida for training as well. And this relationship has been really important, not only for training, but also for improved coordination between our countries and sharing information to help with some of these cases, and also just help with sharing of information and intelligence to also prevent some of these cases happening again. We've also had trainings throughout family islands, really working with officers on the ground, and also with the implementation of TIP 411, which is an application that allows enforcement officers and also everyday community members to report in an effective, efficient, and transparent way offenses that they see every day. Next slide, please. Here are a few pictures of some of the trainings that have taken place within our communities. And I wanted to show these pictures because it really emphasizes that this is all hands on deck. We are in our communities, we're on the ground, and really trying to meet officers and managers where they are to reach our objectives. Next slide, please. So we are about halfway through our 5-year action plan, and now we are continuing to fundraise, we are continuing to implement our activities, and we are continuing to assess progress of these activities. What we will do at the end of the 5 years is to conduct another assessment to be able to measure the effectiveness of this action plan and its implementation to see if we were able to meet our objective. I want to thank you all for your time today. If you have any questions, please reach out to me or any of our partners on this call today. Thank you.
Yay, thanks, Natalie. Thank you, Gregg, for sharing that incredible example. We realize it's a huge effort covering a huge area, and so it won't be directly applicable to all the managers and practitioners on the call today, but our hope was that it could prompt some ideas and some inspiration, and you can dig in a little bit deeper to learn more now during the Q&A session. So just as a reminder, please type any questions that you have into the Q&A chat, or go ahead and raise your hand, and Paola can go ahead and unmute you and you can ask your question yourself, and we'll go ahead and get started. So question, sorry, Natalie, I know you were just talking, but a question did just come in as a follow-up. It was a question about how long did it take to really for poaching to begin to be reduced? So that was one part of the question. And then just wondering a little bit about some of the legal. So did you write new laws and policies or strengthen, amend what already existed? So just curious about just digging in a little deeper there.
Mm-hmm.
If you can share.
So first, we did review the current regulations in the country. WildAid provided technical expertise in terms of reviewing all of the regulations that we have within the country for enforcement and seeing where could we strengthen those, where could we close some loopholes. So that process was done in the action plan. That was a key activity. Secondly, in terms of when did we see reports or when did we see poaching decrease, and that was, I think, really due to the increased presence of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force out at sea, and also the increased communication that we had through our agencies, as I said, and also our agencies in partnership in the US. And so as we saw cases being brought to public light and people actually saw cases, coming to court, people being prosecuted, it really drove that compliance. And so having those cases are really important for driving compliance. And I think that that's when we also really started seeing, seeing reports, especially from those that are out to sea, that they weren't seeing poachers on the ocean as much as well. So that was one of the key contributors to that. In terms of timing, we can say within really the first 18 months of the project.
Incredible. Gregg, is there anything you want to add to that?
I'll just highlight, some of it's political timing, and you get kind of lucky sometimes. We were really lucky that the Bahamas, when WildAid started working in the Bahamas, there was already an initiative underway to rewrite their Fisheries Act. And we were fortunate enough to be able to provide technical assistance in the drafting part of that, to provide some ideas for the Bahamas to consider on closing some of these legal loopholes that smart illegal fishermen are going to exploit and were exploiting. And so it was really good timing from that perspective that allow us to do that. So anyway, just add that piece.
Excellent. It looks like we have a hand. Siva, your hand was raised. You typed in a question, but we'd love to hear from you directly if you can.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes, welcome.
Okay. First, thank you so much for this. This is amazing. I am so happy I woke up and landed here. So thank you.
Siva, where are you joining us from?
So I live in Oregon, but I'm from Tonga, the village of Hatafu. That's where my family's from. And my mom's in Fiji right now, part of the SMA for Hatafu, and then our neighboring cousins live in Natata. So these two areas just got added. And enforcement is such a huge thing because we're all relatives, we're all family, and it's so hard. So my question, not to take up too much time, is it sounded from what Natalie said that enforcement is a really huge part or a major component in the success of these things. So as we're establishing the SME area, I'm interested on like, would you recommend like, hey, get like enforcement involved as soon as possible? And do you guys, you use that the Department of Marine that was established at the Bahamas as an example. Do you guys have like a budget proposal of what, if you're looking at something like this that would be successful, that we could kind of mimic or follow? Do you guys have an example of those?
Well, I think your question was based on if you had an agency that was responsible for enforcement or the creation of an agency for enforcement. Am I understanding you correctly?
Right, because what you said was at some point you guys realized how important that was. So like if you're going 5 years deep and then you're like, if we just had this, would you say that needs to be developed much earlier in the process versus waiting to see?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It should be one of those core components from step one. And as Gregg said, is really bringing all those partners into that conversation from step one. The Department of Marine Resources was already a formed agency in the Bahamas, and they already had an enforcement mandate. But through the Marine Action Partnership, we were actually able to support the official designation of a new agency called the Bahamas Wildlife Enforcement Network, which is going to focus specifically on wildlife enforcement for the country. So it is a new agency. It was something that we were able to support as one of our actions through this work as well. So budgets, these really depend on each country and the needs, and they are, so I would hate to share a budget specifically, but I think what could be done is more importantly is talking through maybe with you and Gregg and looking at all those different components of what you need to help you build a budget. But obviously countries are different, resources are different.
Right, and then the currency, because that was the other thing was like, how are you, do you guys have like one currency that you pin everything to and then convert later, or so? But that's not so much as important as customizing like you just mentioned earlier. So okay, thank you.
Thanks, Eva, for your question, and we have your email, so I can share that with Gregg and Natalie. A few questions have come in related to technology. So Sunny, Sunny and Gregg, I'm gonna just say two real quick and combine them, and then you both can, well, anyone can take a crack at it. But so one is, could you talk a little bit about some of the technical tools you use to carry out enforcement? So this is more related to software. And then there's another question. Are there any tools you recommend for marine park managers for MCS&E, tools like Skylight, Global Fishing Watch, or an app that you just shared now? And then what's the potential for using drones? So I hit you with a lot there, but it's so related. So software, tools, technologies, drones. Love to hear from any of you on that topic. I know it's a huge topic and growing and exciting.
Sure, I can speak to the high level, and then Gregg, you can give examples perhaps of what you guys are working with on the ground. But at a high level, it's a really exciting time to be working in this space because there are so many technology advances happening. Within the last sort of 10 years, we've seen huge advances in satellite technologies. They're putting all sorts of sensors on satellites, so now we can see pretty much most things on the ocean. There's like radar capabilities, there's optical capabilities, which is like a photograph from space. And then more recently, there's radio frequency detection. So like if on a vessel, someone turns on the microwave or like turns on a satellite phone, we can detect that. It's super cool. We have a lot of eyes and ears on the oceans now to enable greater surveillance. And there are some fantastic services out there to provide these capabilities. The Alliance partners with many different types of organizations. One of them is Skylight, and they have a fantastic platform that displays these types of detections in near real time. So that's an excellent tool for marine managers to look at their areas and understand what vessels are where, what are they doing, and then vessels that don't transmit on, say, automatic identification systems, AIS, or vessel monitoring systems, VMS, they can identify those non-transmitting vessels through these other technologies. There are other entities as well that provide sort of historical analysis, so what was going on in areas in the past, and that can help inform these MCS&E strategies to understand what was the historical use case and how should these zones be developed in the future. So yeah, overall, there's a ton of technical tools. We partner with a lot of different organizations to implement those tools. Yeah, and so Gregg.
Thanks, Sunny. I'm going to start with the equipment piece, and I'm just going to say what we often find: you need life jackets, you need a working knife, you need a flashlight, some of the basic tools. So before we get into really technical things, I need a pair of binoculars. Before I go fly a drone, I need a pair of binoculars. And so I would just encourage, on WildAid's website, you can actually see we did a product back in, I think it was like 2017, and it's on the Eastern Tropical Pacific, but it kind of goes into this piece of like, what are those elements? What are those equipment needs that are kind of the critical elements that should be considered? So I would encourage folks, again, on wildaid.org, in our resources tab, you'll find these reports, and it's one on I think it's on the Eastern Tropical Pacific. I can't remember the name. I'll definitely get it to Kristen and others. On the technology side or the software side of the house, one of the things I would encourage all the managers to think about is how can you transition from using paper? How can you transition from capturing patrol information, capturing observations in a public or in a paper format? That happens a lot with law enforcement, to the extent that records are being captured at all. There are some great tools out there. They're not perfect, but there are some really good, powerful tools that you can adopt that are free to the user that can do this. And one of them being Earth Ranger, another one being Smart. Just as two examples. Again, we can give links to the organizers of the webinar to share with you, so you can look at them. But what I'll tell you is, I think having somebody that's advising you on law enforcement, if you're talking about enforcement, having those agencies be part of the discussion before you walk too far down the line and choosing a specific piece of software. Because just remember, that piece of software could become part of a legal case. Are you ready for disclosure? Are you ready to put all that information into a public setting as you hold somebody accountable in court? These are conversations that your law enforcement agencies in country and certainly technical advisors can help you with. And so I just encourage you to try to seek out those advisors for you, who's working in your area that might be in a position to support you. And then on drones, certainly there's a time and a place where drones make sense based on what you have. WildAid has used them fairly effectively, working on mangroves in coastal Ecuador, where it's really hard to get into each one of these isthmus, each one of these places in the mangroves. And so you launch a drone, go up, and I can go find illegal nets that have been put in and other things that are in place. Then I can direct my patrol to the areas of interest. So there certainly is a time and a place. I just would encourage you to get the foundation in place first. Get the foundation that allows your enforcement officers to actually do something when they find a violation. Because if you don't have it, then you just spend a bunch of money on something that tells you there's a problem, but you can't resolve it. So let's make sure you can resolve the issue before you start trying to buy technology to solve it.
Awesome. Thank you both. And I'll just flash on Sunny, something that you said to me before was that technology is only as good as the people behind it. Something like that, but just to the point of like, you have to know what to do with the data that you're going to be receiving, and then just not to get too caught up in the technology, that it's really like the people behind the tech that should be the emphasis and the importance. And yeah, you said that to me and it really stuck with me. So thanks. And Gregg, you mentioned agencies. There's a couple questions that have come in just about agencies. And one is I'll just do these combo together and you guys can tackle them as you want. But one is about encountering corruption within agencies, and if you've encountered that and how to address or overcome that. And then the other one is just about how to begin, how to begin to build interagency communication. And if you receive some pushback, what do you do? So those feel really related. So I'll go ahead and put both of those out there and see if anyone has any experience or anything to, we could say very general experience or how to deal. And Greg, that might be best suited for you.
I'll take a crack at it, and then Natalie or Sunny may have something to add to it. Have we experienced corruption? Of course. Of course we have. Both soft and hard, right? Soft corruption, like where I just don't do my job, and I allow things to slip through the cracks, and hard corruption where you see people actually taking bribes or those type of situations. From my perspective, the best you can do is to start putting in policies and procedures that make it harder for those things to exist. As you start dialing those pieces together and you start making a more robust system that isn't about individuals, but it's about the process, and you have accountability built within those processes, you start to be able to reduce and eliminate or make it much harder for that corruption to exist. Much like illegal fishing, as you make it harder, then all of a sudden you start seeing less of it. At least that's the theory. And it does, in some areas, we have seen some success. On the issue of interagency coordination, absolutely we see some pushback. This is one of the things where my recommendation about engaging those agencies early, because a lot of times you're gonna get that pushback from the police agency, the police who may say like, look, yeah, I know I can arrest underneath your Fisheries Act, but like, that's not my job. My job is to deal with all these other issues in my community. But if you can get them engaged early, start building the trust, show them how this is a net positive for their agency within the community and within the country. Start being able to, explain to them why their role is so important. Then you start to be able to do it. And I will just say, in the enforcement world, trust is everything. And so you have to build that trust. You're gonna have to spend the time and make the effort, and it will be effort on your part to build those relationships and to build that trust with those law enforcement agencies within your country.
I'm on mute. Thanks, Greg. Anyone want to add anything to that? No. Okay. I have another question, but I just want to share. I'll just share it real quick. A little bit of a different direction, but we did have Sybil. I'm going to put you on the spot, but I think it's just a great example and totally quite different from the Bahamas case study that we're sharing right now. So Sybil from Chumbe Island in Zanzibar just shared, their MPA is quite small, 33 hectares. So looking at enforcement from a totally different perspective, she shared early on that our approach to enforcing our no-take MPA was to educate local small-scale fishers about the spillover effect, restocking adjacent reefs. And after 2 to 3 years, this happened. Fishers saw the increased harvest and are fully on our side. No problems with enforcement anymore. And so just totally different, very small, a lot of one-on-one interaction. But I just wanted to share that example. Sybil had to run, or else I would have called on her to share that herself.
I actually wanted to say, I wanted to respond to Sybil as well, because I actually see a lot of similarities in terms of the Bahamas. So even though our EEZ is quite large and we have a lot of areas, having fishers, I think it's a great example, but I think it also shows that the importance of the policy and the regulation review, because that was a process for us, because co-management of areas is one piece that we think is very critical. And when we say co-management, it's like that community management of that area. And so one of the processes that we had to take in the beginning was in those regulation review was, do we have the policies in place to allow something like that to happen? Do we have the policies as a country in place to give an entity the authority to manage an MPA with, in partnership with an MPA or government entity, like a private entity or a nonprofit agency to manage an MPA? Do you have the policies in place? And do you have the policies in place that could allow you to hire a fisher and train them, because this is like step one for anyone that's out there thinking of implementing those solutions, which I think are wonderful and a great example. Sybil, I thank you for putting that in the chat. But it's also like thinking through that process, right? Do you have the mechanism, the policy mechanisms first and foremost to support some of those great solutions that can be implemented? So I completely agree. And in the Bahamas case, we've been looking at how can we change some of the regulations to allow for we had like park wardens and give them greater authority and to hire also more. And what we were able to do through the Fisheries Act is it allowed the minister to call on and be able to allow anyone to be a fisheries or officer to enforce the law if they deemed so, which allowed us and was a hole for us to be able to open up that opportunity for that type of co-management in place.
And I'll be really quick because I know we're out of time. I'll just say, Sybil, there on WildAid's website. Sorry, I sound like a pitch man. We are actively working on Pemba Island and working with the CMGs and the SFCs on some of these small scales. And I would encourage you to go look at the plan that we wrote for the Pemba Island, or for the Pemba Channel Conservation Area for PECA. I think you'll find that some of these pieces and some of the issues you're talking about are addressed where WildAid brings this down to the scale of our partners, or up, whatever the case may be.
Thank you all. Yeah, and the new online toolkit that we're working on is going to have some of these examples and then links out to all relevant resources. So we're really excited to bring that to you shortishly. And we will be sure when we send out the recording of this email to send out any of the links that we mentioned during, so you'll get that. But thank you for this rich discussion. Sorry we don't have time to answer more questions. It's really exciting to see the interest in this topic. I think we could dig in a lot more, and we're excited to do so over the next few months together. Thank you to our panelists and everyone to participating. As I said, we're going to be emailing out the recording. The best way to stay in the loop, if you aren't already a network member, is to sign up. You can just go to reefresilience.org and click on Become a Network Member. You'll get access to latest science and strategies, access to our online trainings, opportunities to learn from experts and your peers, and then also equally important, opportunities to share out your work, your example management strategies, your science through our products that we create. And then of course, you'll receive our email updates and newsletters. So feel free to email us with any questions. Email us, you can see there, resilience@tnc.org, questions about this webinar or the network in general. And you can find us on all those other channels listed there. Reminder, please explore, if you want to learn a little bit more about MCS&E and technology that Sunny mentioned, you can listen to our podcast interview with Sunny. That is on our menu, on our website. And as I mentioned earlier, you're going to be prompted now to take a short survey. So tell us how we can make our webinars better. Tell us what you want to learn more about on this topic. And if you have a burning question that we weren't able to answer, feel free to share it through that survey. So thank you. Thanks everyone for your participation. Thank you to our presenters. Really appreciate your time and sharing your insight and expertise. Okay. Any last words, anyone? Waves? Bye. Okay.